Okay, so good evening. Um, Before we start what we are going to do today, let's just try to remember where we left off last class. So in the last class, we created our application load balancer, right? And we used the application load balancer to route traffic to the EC2 instance in our private subnet 1 and private subnet 2. Another thing we did is the first time we create our application load balancer and we create the EC2 instance, we set them up manually. That is when we put our bash script in the user data to host our website on that EC2 instance. But once we host our website and we got to the point where the website is working, then what we did is we created an AMI, which is this. So pretty much an AMI is once you set up your EC2 instance and it is working properly, your website and it is working properly, you create an AMI of that website and you can use that AMI to launch more EC2 instance that would have your website configurations on it. So that's what an AMI does. First time we set it up manually. Once we set everything up, it is working properly. We create an AMI. Then now we are using that AMI to launch new EC2 instance in our target group. We are using the AMI to launch new EC2 instance. Then we will put those EC2 instance in the target group and the application load balancer is able to route traffic to them. So that's where we left off last class. Does anyone have any question about everything up to this point before we start what we are going to do today? Okay. So just to show you, this is my management console and this is my management console and this is the last two EC2 instances we created, our Jupyter AMI 1A and 1B. And like I said, when we create the AMI, which is under AMI, we use that AMI to launch our EC2 instance, which is our Jupyter. We called it Jupyter Server 1A and 1B. Then we put those EC2 instances in the target group. You can see if I go to target group and select my target group, I have the Jupyter AMI 1A and 1B, and you can see the health check is healthy. So once we put it in our target group, now we can access our site using our application load balancer. So under load balancing, if you select load balancer, we can now access our website using the DNS name of our application load balancer. So if I copy this DNS name, come here, and I'll paste it in there, press enter. And there you go. I can access my site. Excuse me. So this is where we left off. Our site is working properly. We can access our site using the DNS name of our application load balancer. And one thing I said in the last class is that remember that now our site is working, but if I was to give you this number, this DNS name, if I was to give you this DNS name, it has numbers in it and all that stuff, right? Every time you will have to come access my site, you are not going to remember this. You have to probably put the link somewhere and always use the link because nobody will try to remember this. This is where domain name is very important. So what we are going to do now is we are going to register for a domain name and we are going to point that domain name to our application load balancer. And the domain name will take place of this DNS name. So anytime we want to access our site, we will be able to access it using the domain name we registered for. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay. So this is what our architecture looked like. We have our AMI that we use to launch EC2 instance if we need to. And now the user, we are going to register for a domain name in AWS service called Route 53. And that domain name is what we will use to access our website that is on the EC2 instance. So we'll register for the domain name, and this is the steps we are going to use. We'll register for a domain name, and we'll point the domain name to our application load balancer. That's all we have to do. And we'll be able to access our website. Okay, so now let's register for our domain name. To register for our domain name in the management console, we are going to select services, and I believe it's under networking and content delivery Route 53. Select Route 53, or you can search for it up here. So I'll just search Route 53. Now select it. And the first time you are logging to Route 53, it is going to look like this. They always change it. Even me now, I have to figure out. Okay, it will look like this. The first thing we have to do is register, pick a domain name. So one thing I want you to do now is pick a domain name. This is domain name you are going to use for the rest of this class. Even when we create all the other projects, you always use this domain name. And domain name costs $12 to register for. So if anyone has ever tried to buy a domain name online, usually they start around $12. So we are going to register for a domain name for my site. So my domain name will be different from your domain name. If any domain name I register for here, you won't be able to use the same. So you have to pick your own domain name. So think of a domain name you want to use now. Let me think of one. So for this domain name, I'll call it, let me pick a domain name. I'll call it AOS class. I don't know, this is like the easiest thing to do, but I always struggle with trying to pick a name. So I think this is good enough for a domain name. I want to pick something very simple. So because if I try to pick a common one, it probably is not available. So anyway, I'll use this domain name, AOS class. Then I'll check to see if this domain name is available. So once you click check, it will let you know. You can see the domain name I picked is available, my AOS class. So my domain name will be myaosclass.com. And you can see that it says status is available, and it has added to the shopping cart for me here. It is going to be $12. So at this point, if you are satisfied with that domain name, and it is also giving you some alternatives one here that you can use, but I'm fine with my AOS class, then come down. Keep in mind, it is going to cost you $12 a year to register for this domain name. But just keep that in mind. Then once you are satisfied with it, come down, click continue. And in here is where you are going to put all your personal information. So in here, I'm just going to, because I'm going to be sharing this video online, I'll stop sharing the screen. I'll put all my personal information here. Then this place is pretty straightforward. Once you put all your information, all you have to do is click continue. So I'm just going to enter those information now. So pretty much once you enter all your information, right? And you click next, it is going to bring you to this page. So the next thing we are going to do is under here, this is where it asks you, do you want to automatically renew your domain name? If you don't want to renew it every year, because remember they are charging you $12 per year. So you press disable. And once you press disable, you are going to, but if you want to keep renewing it, you can enable it. For now, I will disable it. Then you accept the terms and conditions and click complete order. And here you go. Order submitted successfully. And it is also giving you some information here. Your order is being processed. It might take a little while for your payment to be debited. So just extra information. So just click close. And then it's going to bring you to this page. On this page, it is saying I've registered for this domain name. And it is going to take, domain name registration might take up to 3 days to complete. They'll send you an email once it's successful and all that stuff, but it doesn't usually take 3 days. Maybe at the most, this is where we have to wait. So at the most, it will probably take maybe 10 minutes. So just to keep that in mind. And all I'm going to do from here is click go to domains. And there you go. I'm on the domain. On that, in the Route 53, this is still the Route 53 dashboard. On that pending request, you'll see your domain name there. So if I go to the dashboard, remember the dashboard is where we registered for it. And once you register for it, on that pending request is where you will see that it is pending. So this would take about 15 minutes or 10, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. Then once this is available, we are going to move on with the lecture. I'm not sure why their thing is showing up like this. That's weird. Anyway, in the meantime, while we are waiting for this domain name to be registered, does anyone have any question? Because we have about 10 minutes for the domain name to be registered. Either if you guys have a question or if you want to take a 10 minutes break. So it's up to you. I mean, we've done some stuff up to this point, so it doesn't have to be what we are doing today. If you have a question on anything that we've done up to this point, this is a good time to ask the question.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Did you actually buy the domain or you just?
Yes, I bought it.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure. Well, I used to have, well, I still have the website, but for some reason the guy that was hosting it for me, I didn't pay for the, because I was gonna redesign it with somebody else, so I didn't pay for a hosting fee. But this wasn't under AWS. It was hosting by somebody else that I have to pay every year hosting fees to. But the question I have is, if you have a domain that you already purchased, outside of AWS and all that, and I'm quite familiar with all this particular lecture we're doing today because I I once had my domain with hosting with GoDaddy, and then I moved it to Google. So when I moved it to Google, the guy that was hosting for me gave me the DNS, and that's how I have knowledge about. I'm familiar with. So he gave me the DNS, two DNS server. I think that's what it's called. So and then I went to Google, back end of the website. So I put the like what you're describing now. So I put the DNS information that he gave me. I put it there like in two places, and that allow people that go to the website to be able to access my website and all that. So again, so the question is, if I already hosting, or I already have a domain register with another provider, let's say Google, GoDaddy, there's so many of them now, network solution and all that. So can you still bring it inside here? Um, and still be able to go with everything, or you have to buy it through Amazon, AWS, or how does that work? Do you understand?
Yes, you can. If you register your domain name with another domain name provider, you can. There's a way to import that domain name in here, and you'll still be able to use it to host your website. But there will be additional steps of things you have to do. So I tried to do it one time, which I tried to move my domain name from AWS to I can't remember. Maybe it was from Wix. Yes, from Wix. I tried to move it to AWS, and it was going to take um about 2 weeks for everything to clear. So it does
Okay.
take some time if you register the domain name with a third party and you try to move it into AWS. It takes some time for everything to clear. But yes, you can do it. You can do that.
So basically, so AWS, in AWS, you can pretty much do everything, in what I would say in-house, meaning that within AWS without having to go to Google or register.
Exactly.
Okay. All
So
right.
AWS has all the most of the things you need to host your website. Unless if there are some things maybe they don't have, but most part it has majority of all the things you will need. Everything that AWS, all their services, there is always one thing you can use to host your website. And for learning purposes and also to make things easier, and we'll see reasons why using AWS services is easier because since it's their service, they work well together with each other.
Yeah.
So I would recommend just buying the domain name through them as opposed to trying to bring one in that
Bring it
you
from
own
somewhere
somewhere.
else.
Yeah. So later on, once we know what we are doing and we figure our way around, then we can also look at that. But usually that is I work most of because the company may have so many domain names they are using. So it won't be convenient for them to register for those domain name elsewhere. So everything they will probably be doing in Route 53. So, and yeah. So, but if you want to bring in your domain name, you can do that. It does take time, but you can do it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yes, you're welcome. Does anyone have any question about what we've done so far? So if I ask you guys now, everyone can build a VPC from beginning to end. Like because our next project, we're almost done with this project. And the next project we are going to do, you are going to create your VPC. So at least if at this point, I want to challenge you guys to know how to create a VPC. As in the next project, that's what you will start. Start a new project and you'll start by creating your VPC. This time we are going to create a VPC and the same type of architecture in two availability zones. We'll be using two availability zones, but this time we are going to be using 6 subnets. So 3 in the first availability zone, 3 in the second availability zone. We are going to have 2 private subnets in the first availability zone and 2 private subnets in the second one. So for the next class, all I have to do is give you the architecture and you should be able to create that VPC by yourself. As I'm saying, if you have a question, this is the best time to ask.
Quick question. So the this AOSclass.com domain name, how do you know if it's associated with the port 80 or port 443?
Yeah, it is not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
So yeah, it is just a domain name we are creating for our site. Then once this domain name is available, what the question you just asked, that's when we would do that. So
Gotcha.
remember in our step, the first thing is to register for the domain name, which is what we are doing now. The second step is then we'll point the domain name to our application load balancer. When we point it to the domain, when we point the domain name to the application load balancer, that is where we would now set the listener. On the listener, remember our application load balancer has a listener. So what the ports that the application load balancer is listening on would be when anyone access this, when anyone access our website, aos.com, aosclass.com, then based on the rule we set in our application load balancer, it will either be traveling on. Let me explain it. So once we point it to our application load balancer, if, remember what I showed you guys, if I go and now type aos.com, I'll be accessing it on HTTP. Obviously, I can't do it now. But if I type https.aos.com, then I'll be accessing it on port 443. But that is what the user will be doing. But you as the cloud engineer that you are developing your application load balancer in your own environment, you have to make sure that you've set up the configuration for the different type of ports, whether it's port 80 or port 443, that your end users are going to be using, because you don't know which one they are going to use. But the two ports are port 80 and port 443. So it will make sense once we do it. I know I kind of. So mainly all we have to do now is once this domain name is available, we are going to point it to our application load balancer. And I'll show you that part where you'll be able to tell.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Like I said, this thing, it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes.
How will you know when it's done? It will turn to blue?
Yes, once it is done, it wouldn't show up under pending request anymore. And I'll be able to see it on my dashboard. So if I go to my dashboard now, it is still saying domain registration in progress. This is because it is probably updating all the DNS servers and all that stuff. So it does take some time.
Well, one quick thing I'd like to also share, I mean, if anyone in this class or someone you know, if you are registering a domain name, maybe for your business or for other things, from my experience, it's always good to, and if it's something you are very serious about, like you're running a business or something, like Sis said, it's only $12. It used to be $9.99, but now it's across the board $12. So it's always a good idea to buy, like in this case now, he bought.com, buy .net as well, and buy .org or any popular extension that you can buy. The reason is that if eventually that business is successful, people, let's say in this case now, he bought.com, somebody can buy .net because, and there's a way to trick, when you try to go to a domain name, if you type .com, it can route you to .net. So,
that's true.
and that person will just be taking your business, or eventually, because I've seen, like a couple of years ago, I know people used to, their main business is actually, that is why now it's so difficult to buy domain names now. You have to literally, spell out something, because almost any name you can think of now has been taken. It doesn't necessarily mean that the actual functioning website, but people who actually will go and buy them, and then they will eventually, my domain name now, it's because I've had it for a long time. If you try to get it now, GoDaddy will tell you that it worth like $5,000. And so just from experience, just try to, when you register like .com, if it's something that you're gonna keep, it's not just for training or for future something, buy .net, buy .org, and keep those three and keep paying for it every year. You just never know. If you have a successful business, somebody who they know, they will take .net or the one that is available that you don't have. So just something I like to share.
Yeah, that is true. So that's actually a good advice. I never thought about that. Yes. So people can easily reroute traffic going that's meant to go to your site to their site. Yes. So that's definitely a good advice. But like this domain name, yes, it does take some time. So if you guys are following along, so in your account now, you can register for a domain name now. Whether you've done the other lectures or you haven't done it, you can still register for a domain name now. This is not connected to anything we've done so far. It is just a domain name we are registering in our AWS account. So by the time you get through all the other lectures we've covered, then the domain name will be available for you to register to use. As you can see, it takes some time. Now I can't see it here anymore. So good, that means it is ready. So if I go to my dashboard, you can see I have one hosted zone, DNS management, one hosted zone, and it is my awsclass.com, and the domain name registration is successful. So this is how you register for a domain name. It is that simple. Then once you register for your domain name, the next thing we want to do now is point our application load balance, point this domain name to our application load balancer, meaning that when people access our site, they will be using this domain name instead of the DNS name of our application load balancer. So to do that, we are going to come to service, and we are going to select, well, not even a service. So we are going to do it in this Route 53. So to point it to our application load balancer, you will select your hosted zone. Select your hosted zone. And it is going to bring you in here and select the name of your domain name. We'll select it. And it is going to bring you here. This is where all your DNS record for this domain name you just registered for is. You can see it here, awsclass.com. So all I have to do in here is create another record. And the record we are going to create is called a record. So I'll just click create record. All this. So in here, on that record name, in here, let's just type www. Right? So it's www.awsclass.com. We leave all this as default. The routing is going to be simple routing. In Route 53, they have multiple ways you can route traffic, but we are just going to learn about simple routing. We'll be using simple routing, but when you are studying and learning about picking up knowledge by yourself on AWS, just learn what these other ones are. But for now, it's not something you need to, For now, it is not something you need to worry about. It's something you just need to know. There are other ways to route traffic, but not something we'll be using here. So I don't know why it keeps doing that. So, okay. Once you come in here, it's www in here. It is going to be an A record. Then under alias, right? This is if you were hosting your website on an EC2 instance. Remember the first time we hosted it on an EC2 instance and we used the IP address to access it. This is where you put that IP address. So meaning that it will substitute your IP address for your domain name. But since we are not using an EC2 instance, we are using an application load balancer. We are going to click alias, toggle it on. Then once you toggle it on, select this drop down. What is our alias? Meaning that alias is what, like hiding something. So what is the alias? It is an application, alias to application and classic load balancer. Select that. Then we are going to choose the region where our application load balancer is in. Remember, our application load balancer is in the US East Virginia region. We'll select that. Then the next step is choose your load balancer. So if you select here, you will see the load balancer you have currently running in that region. You will see it and just select it. And once you select it, click create records. And it has created that record. You can see it here. It is www.awsclass.com. I'll select it and you can see it better up here, www.awsclass.com. Now watch, this is my website that I was accessing previously with my application load balancer's DNS name. If I refresh, I mean, it's probably still showing that, but eventually it is going to time out. Or maybe it would still be available, but just for now, I'll just leave that, but it is still showing that you can still access it with that. Oh, yes, that is true. Okay, it makes sense. You'll still be able to access it this way, right? Because the application load balancer is what is routing traffic to our EC2 instance. So it does make sense. You'll be able to access it, but the thing is like nobody will know what this name is. So you don't even need to worry about it. If you think about it, you are accessing other people's site, Amazon.com, whatever their application load balancer is, you don't know what the DNS name is because this is something that's not even exposed to the public. So that is why this is still working. It makes sense. It should work. But once we set up our HTTPS listener, this will probably not work anymore because right now this is only working on port 80. You can see it's saying not secure. That is port 80. Okay, so not to confuse you, once you create your A record, now I'm going to close that just to show you. Then I'm going to copy my domain name here and come here and paste it there and press enter. And there you go. You see, I'm accessing my site, awsclass.com. It is saying not secure because I am accessing it on port 80. And how you can tell you're accessing it on port 80 is if you copy it in a notepad. Let me paste it down there. So I copied the address. I'll paste it there. You can see it is HTTP. Does anyone have any question? And can you see my screen or is it too small? Yeah, I can make it a little bit bigger. Okay. So this is how you point your domain name to your application load balancer. So now this is what you give the users coming to your site. Now this brings us to the question. We've set up our site, the domain name, we set up the domain name, everything is working. What if I try to access my domain name on HTTPS? Right, let me paste this here and I'll just add S here. And I'm going to close this and try to access. See, it's going to give you an error that it can't be reached because remember when we create our application load balancer, the listener we set up only listens on port 80, meaning that it is only checking traffic that is coming on port 80. Now that I'm trying to access it on HTTPS, it is giving me an error. So this is where the next step comes in, where we are going to register for an SSL certificate. In order for you to be able to set up your port 443, the first thing, the main thing that is needed is a SSL certificate. And the certificate is free. It is very easy to set up. We are going to register for that certificate. Then once that certificate is available, we would now go in our application load balancer, create a new listener on port 443, and we will put that certificate on that listener. And that is how we'll be able to route traffic on port 443 too. So just to show you what that means. And I'm going to, under services here, we can type certificate manager. So once you start typing certificate manager, select it. It's going to bring you to this page. And here we are going to click this one, which it says where you want to register for an SSL certificate. So we'll click get started. And it is going to be request a public certificate. we'll click request a certificate. In here is where you are going to put your domain name. So my domain name is AWS class, right, .com. All right. I believe that's my domain name. Yeah, that is it. I always try to be careful, but it's awsclass.com. Then this is my domain name that I want to request the SSL certificate for. Then another thing I always like to do is I can also request, because remember I set up my domain name as www.example.com. So the first www, that is, they call that subdomain name, meaning that every time you go to like a website, you can see that, like you can say projects.amazon.com, web.something, www.something. When you see a word before the first dot, that is a subdomain name. So now that means what we are trying to do here is request one certificate that will work for when our users is coming on awsclass.com and when they are coming from www.awsclass.com. So to request for a subdomain, you will use the star, period, and your domain name. So I'll just copy my domain name and paste it there. So that is how you request a subdomain name of your domain name. And remember, a subdomain name is when there is something before the main domain name. This is the top level domain name, right? The one I registered for AOS class, and anything before it, www.app. or whatever is the subdomain name. So once you enter this information, click next. And on this page, this is where you have to verify that the domain name belongs to you. Just because you come in here and type a domain name, don't mean that Amazon will just give you the certificate. You have to verify that the domain name belongs to you. There are two ways you can verify. The first one is through DNS validation. The second one is email validation. So if you choose email, they will send you an email and you have to go in, verify then once you verify the email, the SSL certificate will be available for you to use. But since one of the benefits of using Route 53 or using Amazon services is because since we register our domain name in Route 53, this DNS validation means that when you click next, it will give you some CNAME. It will give you like a text thing with like a name in it or something. And it will tell you to put that name under your DNS record. So let me show you what that means. So if I go to Route 53, this is my hosted zone. This is my awsclass.com. You see, these are the DNS. These are pretty much all the records under this awsclass.com. So to verify that that domain name belongs to you, if you choose DNS record, DNS validation, they will give you something like this to put in here. And that's how they will verify that it belongs to you. In cases where you are moving your domain name from other parties too, that's what you have to do. You have to come and enter the record in here. So the good part about registering in Route 53 is Route 53 would automatically do all that stuff for you. So I'll select DNS validation and click next. If you want to give it a tag, you can enter a tag, but I'm not going to give it a tag. I'll click review. So it is reviewing it. My domain name is awsclass.com. Let me just verify. Yep. Then, and the validation method I'm choosing is DNS. I'm just going to click confirm and request. So it is saying validation, pending validation. And if I click this drop down, this is the name that I told you that they are going to give you to put in your Route 53 record. So you have to come in there and put this CNAME in your Route 53 record under the hosted zone for your domain name. So the good thing about this is, since we registered this in Route 53, right? Our domain name is registered in Route 53. All I have to do is create record in Route 53. You see this create record in Route 53. Once I click it, Route 53, Amazon would automatically put this name in my Route 53 hosted zone. So you'll see. So I'm just going to click create record in Route 53. See, it is showing me that it is going to create this record in my Route 53 hosted zone. I'll click create. It says success. And we are going to do the same thing for the subdomain name we are requesting. Create record in Route 53. It is showing you it is going to add this C name, create. Remember what the C name looks like. So I think they are the same. Yes, they look the same. So now if I come to my Route 53 record, I'm going to refresh. You can see that C name there. It's this one. So then it is successful. In cases where, let's say you were trying to put it manually, this is also the file. You can download the file. It has the C name there and you can use it. So if I download it, I'll open it just to show you. You can see it is the same C name. But since you are registering it from Route 53, you don't need to download this because what this is telling you to do is just giving you the information you need to update on your hosted zone. But Route 53 has helped us put that record in our hosted zone automatically. So you don't need to download this. Then click continue. You can see it is success. Once you see success for AWS, your domain name and the subdomain name, this is the SSL certificate you are seeing here. This is the detail of the SSL certificate. Now we can use this SSL certificate to secure our website. And that is as simple as that. So registering for an SSL certificate, this is how you register for it. Very simple. Then now let's go and use this certificate to secure our website. Let me show you the okay. Okay. So this is what we did. We created a domain name here, right? We added a route to it to the application load balancer. Now, when we come to our website, we are using our domain name to come to our website. Now we just register for an SSL certificate. The next thing we need to do is create a listener on port 443. Then we are going to put that certificate we register for in that listener. And that is how we are going to be able to access our site on port 443. Let me show you the steps. So we register for an SSL certificate. We did that. The next step is we are going to create an HTTPS listener on our application load balancer. Then we are going to add our SSL certificate to it. So let's go back to in your AWS management console. Let's go to the EC2 service. So I can go to home, type EC2 up here. And we are going to select not running instance. So in your EC2 dashboard, right, come down and we are going to select under load balancing, select load balancers. On your load balancer page, we are going to select listeners. Remember when we were creating our listener, we created this listener on port 80. That was the stuff where it showed you and I told you we're only going to leave it on 80 for now. When we later on will set up our HTTPS. So that was this listener we created in that application load balancer lecture. We are going to add another listener. This time it is going to be HTTPS port 443. The forward action, it is going to be forward to, and we are going to forward it to our target group, and it will come down. So the forward action, we are saying forward, right? Any traffic coming on port 443, forward it to our target group. Remember my Jupyter target, my Jupyter TG, that is the target group that my application load balancer is currently routing traffic to. Any EC2 instance in that target group is where my application load balancer is routing traffic to. So remember, HTTPS, you select the forward action forward to target group. Then you come down under security policy. This always stays the same. You don't change that. Then under default SSL certificate, right? You are going to click this drop down and you can see I only have one certificate in there right now. The one I just registered for. I'll select it and click add listener. So now you see successfully created listener on port 443. And there you go. That's all we need to do. So now if I go back, you can see I have two listeners now. One is listening on port 80, forwarding my traffic to the target group. Another one is listening on port 443 and forwarding the traffic to my target group. Now, if I access my site, not this one. Now, if I use HTTPS, right? https://www.awsclass.com to access my site. Paste it there. You can see it is HTTPS. Press enter. There you go. You see, I have the lock icon. Connection is secure. And this is how you get to all the sites you guys go to. This is it. At this point, our site is done. You're ready to people to start accessing it using our domain name and all that good stuff. Now watch what happens again. If I now try to access this site again on HTTP port 80 AOS class, paste that there, press enter, I can still access it. This was what I was showing you guys about this website. My Zoom thing is always in the way. This was what I was showing you guys about this website. So when I access it here, I can still access it. It is saying not secure. If you look at mine, not secure. And when I try to, my Zoom thing is always in the way. It's annoying. Excuse me. I know you guys probably can see. So now when I try to access this site again, let me copy their domain name here. So that is the other site. So this is the HTTP. So I'll copy the HTTPS, copy it. And I'll put HTTPS here. So now when I try to access this site on HTTPS, let me close this and show you. I can access it because you know why? The same thing we just did, they set up two listeners, one on port 80, one on port 443 that is forwarding traffic to their target groups. However they did it, right? So in the case of what we are learning, because we have two listeners, one on port 80 and port 443 forwarding traffic to our target group, if the users are coming into our site, they are typing awsclass.com, they will still be able to access our site, but it will only be defaulting to port 80. So let me try that now. I'll type awsclass.com, press enter. See, Anytime you type that, it is always going to default to port 80. In order for you to go on the HTTPS, you have to specifically put the HTTPS next to it. So that was what was happening in the case of that other site. You see now, my site is accessible through port 80 and port 443. So now to stop this from happening, we have to go back to our EC2 console under the application load balancer. You see this, our HTTP listener. We have to edit the rule for this listener. The actions of this listener, we have to edit it. So we are going to select it, select edit, right? Look at what the rule is saying. We are saying anytime a user is trying to access our site on port 80, forward them to our application load balancer's target group. We don't want that. So what we are going to do is we are going to delete this. Once you delete that, we are going to add a new action, right? So now we are saying whenever the users are trying to access our site on port 80, we want to redirect them to. And what do you want to redirect them to? HTTPS. So in here, we just type 443. And that's all we need to do. You understand? So we are saying anytime a user is coming on port 80, redirect that traffic to HTTPS. And once you put that, everything else here stays the same. We'll click update. It has successfully modified listener on port 80. So we'll go back. So you guys understand now? Port 443 is routing traffic to our target group. So anytime someone is trying to access on port 80, it is just going to redirect it to 443, which will go to the target group. So it's like this 80 is not doing anything but helping us redirect our traffic to 443. So let's go and test it now. So I'm still on this port 80. Let me refresh. You see what will happen. You see, right instantly it changed to secure 443. See, HTTPS. Let me show you guys again. If I come in here, I'll type awsclass.com. See, it is instantly redirecting it. What if I type HTTP? So remember, I have the HTTP. You have to test everything. So what if I type HTTP awsclass.com? Close that. Remember, this is HTTP. You can see it there. Press enter. See, it is automatically redirecting it. And when I was telling you guys on that other site, that is just one simple step that they forgot to do. Does that make sense? And does anyone have any question?
Okay, question. On the suggestion I was giving earlier on about buying multiple extension for websites. Oftentimes, like, sometimes, I mean, of course, you have .net and .com and .org and all that. Sometimes, for example, now I have my Navy Federal banking website. If I try to go to their website, their domain name is .net, but I'm so used to using Control Enter to automatically put www and .com. So when I do, so of course the right domain name they have is .net, but when I do Control Enter and I put .com, it will still take me to their website. So if you mistake, even if you don't remember the website, because we are so default to .com, but majority of websites, as you know, are .net or something else. So if you have a domain name like register now, and if you have it as .net or .org and all that, but you want to make it easier for people when they try to access your website, whatever you would think of the popular domain extension they would type for your website to automatically route them, even though it's a mistake. In fact, some people will even also do it to the point of, as you think of possible errors people will make when they are typing websites. for, like, we have AOS class now. So some people will even register AWS class thinking that people will make those mistakes. So when you have multiple sites like that, I mean, multiple domain names that you register like that, so do you have to set them up like all the things you did about, routing
Yes.
individually to make sure that people, regardless of what they type, is still going to take them to the main goal?
Yeah, so for those ones, for all those other domain names that you think people would type in, you would have to go and register a domain name for it. Then the way we point that alias to the application load balancer, you'll be pointing everything to the application load balancer. So if those people are, you register an SSL certificate, set everything up like that. So that way, if those users are typing those domain name, it will keep routing them to but there's probably like a way to redirect it. But that is
Yes, because for my website, I have .net and .com. And usually when I give the site to people, I just say .com. But I know that sometimes people by default or mistake. So, but of course, I'm learning this with you now. But in the actual server, the person that was hosting it for me, I went in there, and it's kind of very looking familiar with me now with what I used to do. So I automatically forwarded the .com to, so even if you type .net or whatever, it's still gonna take you
yeah.
to
So
main thing.
so one thing I'm realizing, that's just like if you as a company wants to do that, I guess the main understanding is if your users are trying to access your site, they should know the name anyway. But obviously true, it is also, you can try to fix that human error where you can, those are additional things you have to do, which you really don't need to do, that you can do to make sure that if they are typing something, it comes to the traffic comes to your website. So for example, Amazon don't have that set up. So right now, if I type amazon.net, right, it just tells me it's not
Okay,
available.
now, okay. You
Yeah.
would think Amazon as big as they are.
Yeah,
So,
because they expect people to know that they are supposed to type .com, not .net. So if I go back now and just do Amazon, uh, Amazon.com, you see, it works.
okay.
So it's just an additional thing you can do. I mean, it's based on you. If you, because people can type so many different names, and to try to remember all the things they can type wrong is an additional step that you really don't have to configure. The main thing you want to worry about is making sure that if they are typing your domain name, whether on HTTP or just typing it like this, it is redirecting them on a secure traffic port 443. That's all. Does anyone have any question? Is this stuff exciting? To me, it is. So when you guys access people's site and you see this log icon there and all that stuff, this is one of the, if it is hosted on AWS, this is how they did it. Okay. So we are done with pretty much we're almost done with this project. Right now, we have set up everything. This is our VPC. We have 2 EC2 instances in the private subnet. We have NAT gateway that is helping them route traffic to the internet. We have set up an AMI. So if we need to create new EC2 instance for our website, this AMI will allow us to do that. We've set up our Route 53, set up our SSL certificate to secure traffic on port 443. So we are really done. The one last thing we need to do now is we need to add elasticity. Remember when we talked about that, and scalability to our application? Meaning that right now, these 2 EC2 instances, we manually created them here. And this is where we talked about when, let's say this 2 EC2 instance can only accept traffic of 1,000 people. In the case where it was Black Friday, the traffic increased to 2,000. We want this EC2 instance to be able to add new servers without us even coming in and manually adding any server. We want it to be able to just create new server by itself while we are sleeping. Or in another case where this EC2 instance just failed. Sometimes things happen where the EC2 instance, something will be wrong with the AWS underlying infrastructure and the EC2 instance will fail, right? We want to be able to automatically remove the bad instance and create new ones in there without us having to come in manually and do that. So this is where we are going to introduce auto scaling group. Auto scaling group is this AWS service that will allow you to be able to scale up your EC2 instance by adding more EC2 instance or scale down by removing EC2 instance. So that is the last part of our project that we have to cover, and we are done with this project. So let me show you. Okay. So we have everything. Now we are going to create an auto scaling group. And if you see this little orange line, the EC2 instances are in the orange line, meaning that the auto scaling group is the one creating the EC2 instance. If you look at the one we had before, we manually created them. Now, the auto scaling group is the one responsible for creating those EC2 instances. And this would free us from having to go in and manually do that. So that's what we are going to do next. So let me close this. Our site is working. Good. To create our auto scaling group, let me start at the home. So we are going to come to EC2. So if you type EC2 in there, select the EC2 service. And to create our auto scaling group, let me show you the steps. The first step is to create a launch template. A launch template means that it is a template. Think of what a template is. A template is just something, how do you put it? Let's say you are printing a shirt, right? There's a template you use to print the same type of logo on that shirt.
Like a prototype.
Exactly. So that's just a template. It's the same concept here. We are saying the launch template will be what our EC2 should look like every time our auto scaling group is creating them. So we will create our launch template. We'll tell it, we want to use this AMI, we want to use this EC2 instance type. Pretty much everything we select in that configuration when we are creating our EC2 instance. We'll create that launch template. So when our auto scaling group is creating new EC2 instance, it will create them according to our specification in the launch template. So that's all a launch template is. So in your EC2 console, we are going to select launch template here. And we are going to select create launch template. We'll give it a name. I'll call it Jupyter launch template. Right? And I'm going to use the same name as the description. Right? So the next thing is auto scaling group guidance. Because yes, our auto scaling group is going to be using this launch template. So we are going to select provide guidance to help me set a template that I can use for EC2 auto scaling groups. So what this means that when you are creating this launch template, it will guide you and help you remove all the extra settings you don't need. Because not all the settings will work for auto scaling group. So by selecting this auto scaling guidance, it will just help you remove some of the ones you don't need. And you'll see that as we go. So check that box, come down. Under Amazon machine image, right? That is our AMI. Remember when you are creating your EC2, you specify your AMI. We are going to do the same thing here. But remember, we created our own AMI. So if you keep scrolling down, I'll scroll down. Under my AMIs, you see the Jupyter AMI we created in the last class. I'm going to select it. So I'm telling you now, when my auto-scaling group is using this launch template to create an EC2, I want to use my Jupyter AMI. The next option is your instance type. Again, we always use T2 micro. So you come here and you select T2 micro. Make sure it is the free tier. There are some instance type here that cost a lot of money, like a lot. So please be careful and make sure you select T2 micro free tier. So when you are clicking it, please even be clicking it from this free tier, so you know you are selecting the right one. And when you look in here, it should be T2 micro free tier. We are going to scroll down. Under key pair, that is where we are going to put the key pair that we always use to SSH into our EC2 instance. So I'll select this drop down. You should see one key pair in your Northern Virginia region that we've been using. I'll select that key pair. Scroll down. Network settings, yes, it is always going to go, our EC2 will go in a VPC. And under security groups, we are going to select the drop down. And we want to put it in the security group we want to associate with it is the web server security group. That is the one we created for this project. So this is where naming your security group by being descriptive is very important, because I can see my web server security group here. I'll select it. Then storage, we'll leave storage as default. Tags, we are not going to add any tag. Network interface, nothing. Then under the advanced details, select the drop down. And in here, you can see all this we are going to leave as default. We don't need to change anything here. The only thing we can change is detailed CloudWatch monitoring if you want to enable it. You know, remember we said CloudWatch is the service you use to monitor the metrics of your EC2 instance. And CloudWatch reports service every 5 minutes. It reports your metric every 5 minutes. But I think if you want to be much detailed about it, you can tell it to report it every 1 minute. So that's what we mean by detailed CloudWatch monitoring. I always enable this. But everything else here, we are going to leave as default. So leave everything else as default, come all the way down and click Create Launch Template. We have successfully created our launch template, and that's all you need to do. You can view your launch template and you'll see it here. And that concludes the first step. Let me close some of these other ones. Okay. The next step is we are going to create our auto-scaling group. So to create our auto-scaling group, in your EC2 console, we are going to come down. We are going to select auto-scaling groups. We are going to click Create Auto-Scaling Group. We'll give it a name. I'll call it Jupyter Auto-Scaling Group. I'll just call it ASG. So Jupyter Auto-Scaling Group. See, now it is asking me to choose my launch template. Sometimes, right, your thing may be on, there are two ways you can, there are two things auto-scaling groups can use to create your EC2 instance. Before, we used to use launch configuration, but AWS has changed it where the launch configuration is still available, but the one they recommend the most is launch template. So that's why I'm teaching you guys the launch template. Just in case if you select this dropdown, you don't see a launch template here. For example, yours might be on launch configuration. You may see launch configuration here. And if you select here, you won't see anything to select. That's because you are on launch configuration. So just select switch to launch template and make sure this is saying launch template. And when you select this drop down, you'll see your launch template we just created. I'll select it and it's going to give you the preview of the settings on that launch template. I'm going to click next. And in here is where we are going to be configuring the stuff for our application load balancer. Under the instance purchase option, we are going to leave that as adhere to launch template. Then we'll come down. Under VPC, which VPC do we want our auto scaling group to create the EC2 instance in? Well, we are going to create in our Jupyter VPC, right? Then we'll select our subnets. Remember in our application, right? Our EC2 instance, we are going to be creating them in private subnet 1 and private subnet 2. So under subnet, I'm going to select my private subnet 1. And I'm going to select my private subnet 2. Once you select those two, click out. Make sure you have private subnet 1 and private subnet 2. Then click next. Under load balancing, yes. Remember we have a load balancer. Let me close this other ones. Under load balancing, remember we have the only way people can access our website, which is on the EC2 instance in the private subnet, is through the load balancer. So we have a load balancer that is routing traffic to the target groups that we put those EC2 instance in. So that's what this option is saying. We have a load balancer, so we will select attach to an existing load balancer, right? And here it is saying the next option is saying choose from your load balancer's target group, right? Yes, this is the option we want. We'll select the drop down and you should see your load balancer target group. You see my Jupyter target group. I'll select it and I'll come down under the health check. Remember, I also told you that your application load balancer is also smart enough to detect whether your EC2 instances are healthy. And if they are not healthy, it is not going to route traffic to them. So this part is optional, but we can also enable the health check on the load balancers too. Then under additional settings, enable group metrics collection within CloudWatch. This is also optional, but we are going to enable it. If you don't enable any of this, it is not going to break anything, but we should just enable it to give us just a better configuration. We are going to click next. This is where the configuration of your auto scaling groups comes in. Remember we said when our auto scaling group wants to start creating more servers or removing some servers, we will be sleeping. So we don't even know when it is going to kick off that workflow. This is where one of the places where we set up that configuration. So on that desired capacity, this is where we will tell it at all times, how many EC2 instances do we want to maintain running? Currently, our architecture, we are just using 2. Let's say we have 4 EC2 instances here that we want to keep running at all times. Then that is going to be our desired capacity. But for right now, our desired capacity is 2, meaning that on a normal business working day, we always want to have 2 EC2 instances running. So in here, we are going to change this to 2. The minimum capacity. This means that when our auto scaling group wants to scale down, because the 2 EC2 instance we have here is not really serving enough people are not coming to our site. So it's just sitting there, not doing anything, right? We want to remove. So what the minimum capacity is saying that when your auto scaling group is scaling down, meaning that when it is removing servers, how many servers do we want it to limit it to? So we'll leave this at 1. And under maximum capacity, that is the opposite of minimum. When our auto scaling group is adding more servers, How many servers do we want it to keep adding? It will keep adding servers until it gets to how many servers? We'll say 4. So let me explain what this means again. Desired capacity 2, meaning that at all times, we will, on a normal working business, we will always have 2. When our auto-scaling group detects something and it wants to remove server, it will keep removing our server until it gets to 1, and it will only leave 1. And if our auto-scaling group detects something and it wants to keep adding servers, it will continue to add servers until it gets to 4. When it gets to 4, it is going to stop. If we put 10 in here, it will keep adding servers until it gets to 10. But it would only add more servers based on if it detects that it needs more server. Let's say your normal 2 is EC2 used to serve 4. Like your normal EC2 instance serves 1,000 users. And now 2,000 users start coming to your site. Your auto-scaling group will scale up and add more servers. But let's say we put 10 here. It won't just keep adding until it gets to 10. No, it will add 1 server and it will see if now you have 3. It will see if those 3 can handle those traffic. If those 3 can handle those traffic, it is going to stop. But if it can't, it will add 1 more to maintain it, and it will check whether the 4 can handle. So we'll keep doing that until it gets to your maximum. So remember, desired capacity 2, minimum when it is scaling down 1, and maximum when it is scaling up 4. But this number is whatever you want it to be. You can put 10 here, 2 here, it doesn't matter. But usually for companies, they will have bigger numbers here. Then scaling policy is also an additional thing we can use. We'll do that next. But scaling policy allows us to also add more servers and remove more servers based on some type of metric. And the metric we are going to use is the CPU utilization. So we are saying, like, if we have an EC2 instance that the CPU utilization is less than 30%, meaning that when your CPU utilization is low, it means that it is not being used. So we'll tell you, if we have an EC2 instance that the CPU is low, we want to remove it. So that is what this will do, but we'll set this up next. For now, we'll leave it as none. So that's all we need to do on this page. And we are going to click next. Under notification, this is when your auto-scaling group detects something and it wants to take some action, it would send you an email saying, oh, I want to add 1 server. I'm terminating 1 server. This is just for your activity. Yes, we want to add a notification. I'll click add notification. And remember, we already set up an SNS topic when we set up our CloudWatch alarm, right, for our billing in the first lecture. So we can use that same topic because we connected that topic to our email. In case if you don't have that topic, you can click create a topic here. You click create a topic, you give that topic a name, and you add your email address to it. But if you do that, make sure you go to the email and verify that topic. You have to verify it, meaning that they will send you an email. You just have to go to your email and confirm it. But since we already have a topic in here, let's use our billing one we set up. Then these are the events that the auto-scaling group will notify you on. It will notify you on launch. It will notify you on terminate. It will notify you if there is a fail to launch and if there's a fail to terminate. We'll leave all this on. Click next. We are going to enter a tag, right? This is similar to the way we've been tagging our EC2 instance. So I'll call it auto-scaling group EC2. So I'm tagging the EC2 instance, meaning that when the auto-scaling group is creating the EC2 instances, it is going to add this tag to them. So you can see here, tag new EC2 instances. It is going to tag them this auto-scaling group EC2. Then I'll click next. On this page, we are just going to review everything. Scroll all the way down and click create auto-scaling group. Remember on our auto scaling group, we said our desired capacity is 2. Minimum is 1 and maximum is 4. Now watch what happens if I go to my EC2 console. So I'll go to EC2 and I'll select running instances. I'll refresh. Let me come back here. It's still updating capacity, right? Okay. So I'll come to my EC2 instance, I'll refresh. Let's give it some time. You will see that the auto scaling group will start to create my EC2 instance in here. So let me select instances first. You see, it is still under pending. That is why it's not showing. See, the auto scaling group, you see ASG EC2. The auto scaling group, I told it on a normal working thing, I want to always maintain 2 EC2 instances. So it is starting to create those 2 EC2 instances. So let me go back to the dashboard again and select running, and you can see them there. The ASG EC2. You can see they are just initializing. These other ones we have here, remember this is the Jupyter AMI one we created manually. Remember we first created the EC2 manually. Now we are using auto scaling group to create them. So now that we are using our auto scaling group to create our EC2, we are just going to terminate the ones we created manually. So the ones you created with the Jupyter one manually, right? We are going to terminate them. I'll just select those 2 and I'll click terminate instance. Because we really don't need them, because we always want our auto scaling group now to take the place of creating our EC2 for us. Now we don't have to come back in here, select launch instance and all that stuff. So I've terminated those instances that I created manually. Now you can see the ones in here are the ones that my auto scaling group is creating for me. And you can tell by the name, because I told it any EC2 instance you create, target the name ASG EC2. All we have to do is wait for this to pass the status check. If I try to go access my site now, well, it is just still, it's probably picking it up already, but let me try that again. Yeah, it's probably still picking it up, right? You can see my site is working. So maybe when this is initializing, right, it is still, my site is still working. Let me try it in incognito and see, it could be the catch. Yep, it is working. So it's still picking it up. And you can see now that you see that I terminated the EC2 instance that I created manually, right? And I can still access my website. That is because my auto scaling group is creating this new EC2 instance for me. Even though it's saying initializing, it has already passed. So even you see that one has passed. That's why I can access my site. And the other one will probably pass soon, right? But when it's showing initializing, it means that it has probably finished the part where the configuration to access my site is there. Now, if you go to your target groups, right? I'll go to target groups. That 2 EC2 instance my auto scaling group just created, it is automatically putting them in the target group. You can see if I select target group, you can see my target group has 2 EC2 instances in it, and you can see that those EC2 instances are my auto scaling group EC2, and they are healthy. Remember when we were setting up our auto scaling group, we told it, yeah, we are using an application load balancer. I want you to put it in this target group when you are creating them. That is exactly what it is doing. So, and again, I can access my site. So now we just introduce what we call scalability into our application, meaning that our application can scale without us touching it. And let me prove that to you. I told my auto scaling group, so if I come down on that auto scaling group is right here. I told my auto scaling group that at all times, I want to maintain 2 EC2 instances. Watch what happens. So I'll go back to the EC2 console. So I'm under EC2 now. It's just 2 different tabs that I open. Sometimes if you are working on something, right? I'm under the auto scaling group. If you want to open a new tab, all you have to do is right click here, open a new tab. And in this tab, I can go to EC2, right? Remember I told my auto scaling group here, that I always want 2 EC2 instances running at all times, my desired capacity. Under my running instance, you see that I have 2 EC2 instances running. Watch, when I take one of this, I'm going to terminate it. I'll refresh. See, I've terminated that EC2 instance. You can see successfully terminated. I'll give it a couple of minutes, like I'll give it some time. Watch what's going to happen. Auto scaling group is going to detect that I don't have 2 EC2 instances because I told it I want 2 EC2 instances running. It would detect that I only have 1 EC2 instance running, and it would automatically start to create another one. So let me refresh. I'll give it some time because the auto scaling group, it has some time built into it where, and you can always adjust those time. It has some time where after some time, not very long, that it would detect. But if you want to see, because right now I'm only filtered by running instance. If I want to see all the instances that I have going on, you can see these are the ones I've terminated. But if I keep refreshing here, you see after some time, you will see 1 EC2 instance will come back. I'll just give it some time, maybe like a minute or 2. You have to give it some time for your auto scaling group to catch it. Refresh. In the meantime, while I'm waiting for the auto scaling group to detect it, does anyone have any question?
Okay, the question I have is when you put, when you set up the auto scaling, you put 2 at all times, 1 for minimum and 4 for maximum.
Mm-hmm.
Does that 1, 2, 4 denote some kind of ratio? Like maybe 1 is every 1 means 1,000, or you can actually put 1,000 or 1 million or whatever the traffic to your website will be.
Yes, that 1 means 1.
Okay.
1 means 1 EC2 instance. So
okay.
if I want to put 1,000 EC2 instance scale down, yes, I'll have to type 1,000 in there.
Okay.
Yeah. So it takes time. Give it some time. It will pick it up. You see. There you go. You see. You see. It has started creating a new EC2 instance which is pending. See, the other 3 are the ones that were terminated. Let me wait for the state to change to running. Then I will filter it so you can see. Let me just I'll filter it and go to my dashboard, filter it. Because the state has not changed to pending, that's why you are not, because the state is still on pending, it has not changed to running. That's why you are not seeing it in here. But see, it is now initializing. And you saw that it did that automatically. I didn't have to go in there and create the EC2 instance manually because it is going by my desired capacity, which I said is 2. And if I try to access my website, my website remains working. When you guys are accessing people's website all the time. Things like this are happening on the back end, but it does not affect your experience as a user because they've created the application to be what we are adding here is fault tolerant application, an application that is scalable and elastic. It is fault tolerant because when I terminated one EC2 instance, you could still access my site from the other EC2 instance. If my site was still working, you as the user, you won't even know that there was a fault with one EC2 instance on the backend. And when my auto scaling group detect that, it created another EC2 instance for me. That is scaling, meaning that I told it I always want two EC2 instance. It is maintaining the EC2 instance for me at all times. The last part of this project we have to do is the scaling policy. This auto scaling group, there are so many things we can add to it to make it more robust. The only ones we'll talk about is just the scaling policy. Well, it is the scaling policy, but remember what I said, we are going to scale up based on the CPU utilization, meaning that if we just have this two EC2 instance sitting here now, I have this two EC2 instance here, they are hosting my site, but nobody is going to my site right now. So that means that they are just sitting there. My auto scaling group will be smart enough to realize that, and it will remove the instances based on my settings here. So when it realized that these two EC2 instances are here and their CPU utilization is lower than what I would put in the scaling policy, it will start to remove one, right? It will be removing them one by one until it gets to my minimum. So right now I only have two. So all it will do is remove one, which will get it to one minimum. So that is what the scaling policy is. But we can also do a scaling policy to scale up, meaning that if we put a certain amount of scaling policy and the CPU utilization is greater than a certain threshold, it will add. So let me just show you what that means. Again, on your EC2 console, we are going to come down. You are going to select auto scaling groups. You select your auto scaling group you created. Under automatic scaling, we are going to select it. Then in here is where we are going to create our automatic scaling. So you see where it says create dynamic scaling policy. We are going to click create that. So under policy type, select this drop down. We'll just use simple scaling. That is what we will use for the entire of this project and the other class. So the scaling policy name, we are going to create two scaling policy. The first one we are going to create is for, remember what I said, when our CPU utilization is greater than a certain threshold, it would start to add more EC2 instance for us. So for this one, let's call it high CPU. So I'll call this high CPU, right? But when you are creating a scaling policy, remember CloudWatch, right? CloudWatch has an alarm, just like the alarm we created for our billing, where we can always tell the alarm, if something reached a certain threshold, kick off the alarm. And when it kicks off that alarm, that is when the auto scaling group will start to take that action. So in here, we don't have any alarm other than our billing alarm. So we need to set an alarm for this scaling policy we want to create. So let's click create a CloudWatch alarm. It is going to open a new tab for you. You are doing stuff here. When you click this, it would open a new tab for you here. In here, you select metric. The metric we want is EC2 and select auto scaling group by auto scaling group. It will bring you here. The metric we want to use is the CPU utilization. So you can see there's different metrics here that you can use to trigger an alarm to take some type of scaling action against your EC2. The one we are going to use is CPU utilization. So I'll check it, click next. So I clicked select metric, excuse me. So in here under the namespace, leave everything as default. Make sure this CPU utilization, you don't change it. And make sure you see this graph here. If you don't see this graph, it means your something is wrong with your settings. So make sure you see the graph. Then the statistic is going to be average for the period, meaning that how long will it check it? Let's reduce it to 1 minute or 30 seconds. So, well, 30 seconds is too. Let me do 1 minute. So let's do it to 1 minute. So that way it will be able to detect it faster. The threshold type, we are going to leave it as static. And whenever CPU utilization is, this is where we will tell it, right? I'll use greater than or equal to, because the first one I'm setting is greater than or equal to. And in here, I'm going to put 80, right? So let me explain what this means. So I'm saying that whenever the CPU utilization on my EC2 instance is greater than or equal to 80% for 1 minute, it is going to trigger this alarm. So that's what that means. Again, whenever the CPU utilization is greater than or equal to 80% for 1 minute, it is going to trigger the alarm. When your CPU utilization is greater, that means that more people are coming to your site and they are using your EC2 instance. So there is more load on it and it is using more CPUs. At the point where you are approaching almost 100%, you want to tell the auto scaling group to scale up and add more EC2 instance. Because when it has more EC2 instance, your application load balancer would evenly route traffic to the extra new ones. So that is what this is saying here. We are going to click next. And in here, we are going to come back up. Under notification, it is going to be in alarm. And we are going to choose under select an SNS topic. We are going to choose an existing SNS topic, which is our billing SNS one. We can use the same one. We don't have to set up multiple SNS. And you can see the email it is going to notify me on. Then that's all we need to do here. We are going to come down, click next. And we are going to give this alarm a name. Remember, what we are creating here is a CloudWatch alarm. So we are going to give this alarm a name. We are using this alarm for iCPU. So I can call it iCPU. I guess I can space it, iCPU. Let me put a dash, iCPU alarm. I spelled that right. So I'm going to copy this. I'll use the same name as the description and I'll click next. So I'm creating that iCPU alarm. I'll scroll down, click create alarm. You can see you can see this is my billing alarm, the one that alerts you when your estimated charges is above $10. The one I just created is a iCPU alarm, the one that will notify me if the CPU utilization on my EC2 instance is greater than or equal to 80% for 1 minute. So that's the new alarm. Once you create your alarm, don't forget to finish creating your scaling policy. So I've created my alarm. I'll come back here to where I was creating my scaling policy, refresh. And when you click in here, you will see that high CPU alarm we just created. We'll select that. We connected that alarm to this scaling policy. So now this is where the auto scaling group will take action. So take action meaning that when this alarm is triggered, remember this alarm is saying whenever your CPU utilization is greater than 80%, it is going to trigger the alarm, the iCPU alarm. And when the iCPU alarm is triggered, what do we want to do? Well, we want to add server. So we'll put server here. And by how many do we want to add server? We can increase this to 1. So I will say capacity unit. So what this means is that when this alarm is triggered, this iCPU alarm is triggered, add 1 new server. And the auto scaling group will add 1 new server. And now we will go from 2 to 3. And it will monitor it, make sure our traffic, the CPU, because when you add 3 servers now that is serving your people coming to your site, the CPU will drop. But if the alarm triggers again, it will keep adding 1. But it will keep adding 1 until it gets to the 4, because we specify keep adding 1 until you get to 4. So that's what this means. Click create. But if you don't understand this, we are still going to do it like 5 more times. So by the time you are done with this whole class, you will understand. So we have created our high CPU alarm. This is to add servers. Now we need to create another one for our low CPU, meaning that if our CPU is low, we want to remove servers. So again, we'll just click create dynamic scaling policy. It is the same way we created the other one. We are going to select this simple scaling. We'll give it a name. Let's call it low CPU. Then under CloudWatch alarm, remember we need to create an alarm for it. So I'll click create a CloudWatch alarm, select metric. It is going to be EC2 by auto scaling group. Remember the metric we want is CPU utilization. I'll select it. Just in case if you can't find the CPU utilization there, just start to type it in here. The same way you see it on my screen. If you start to type CPU, it will pop up. So we want the CPU utilization. Click next to select metric. You'll see it in here. We'll leave all this as the same. And for the period, let's select 1 minute as well. We'll go down. Threshold is going to be static. Now we are saying whenever the CPU utilization, this time we want to say lower. We are saying whenever the CPU utilization of our EC2 instance is lower than, let's put a metric in here, and I'll put a number that it would allow it to trigger very fast. So let me put 35. So I'm saying whenever the CPU utilization on my EC2 instance is lower than 35, meaning that when you are not using it, the CPU will be very low. Whenever the CPU is lower than 35% for 1 minute, I want you to trigger this alarm. I'll click next. Remember, I will go back up. We want to add it to an SNS topic. So it will be in alarm. We are going to choose an existing SNS topic, click this drop down. We'll add it to the billing topic we created. And you can see the email, it is going to alert me on. I'll come all the way down and click next. And remember what we are creating here is the alarm. So I'll call this low CPU alarm. I'm just going to use the same name as the description. Click next. And it's giving us a preview, right? Scroll down and click create alarm. We have created our low CPU alarm. You can see it is still saying insufficient data. It is saying insufficient data because we have to connect it to our scaling policy. You see, our high CPU alarm is okay because right now, nobody is accessing my site. So the CPU is not changing. So it will take more people to access my site for me to raise the CPU to 80%. So that's why the alarm is saying okay. But remember, nobody is accessing my site now. By the time I create this low CPU alarm, it should trigger this alarm because now nobody is accessing my site. So it should trigger it. So once you create the alarm, come back here, click refresh and select create not create alarm. Click refresh and we are going to select this drop down and we'll see our low CPU alarm in there. Select it. And we are taking action. So we are saying when this low CPU alarm is triggered, what do we want to do? Well, we want to remove. Remember, when the CPU utilization is lower, meaning that nobody is accessing your site, you don't want to add more, you want to remove. So we are removing. How many servers do we want to remove at a time? 1 at a time. That's all this means. We'll click create. And that is how we create our scaling policy. we have a high CPU and we have a low CPU. And now if I come here to this alarm, eventually it is, because I just connected, eventually watch, it would change. I'll click refresh. It is still collecting the information. That's why it is saying insufficient. I have to, because we just created it. So once it gets all the information on the EC2 instance, we specify for 1 minute. So eventually it will change. You'll see that this low CPU alarm will change to alarm state, because if we go on EC2 right now and we go on monitoring, right? Look at the CPU utilization of my alarm. It is less than 2.5. It is 2.5, which 2.5 is less than 30. So we are saying anything less than 30, meaning that we are not using that EC2 instance and we want to remove the ones we are not using. You can see the percent of my EC2 instance right now because I'm not using it. Nobody is accessing it. This is the CloudWatch thing that I was showing you. So CloudWatch is what you use to see all the metrics of your EC2 instance. See, my CPU utilization is 2.5. So let me go back to that alarm and you can see that I have one alarm. I'll refresh it. It is my low CPU alarm. And it has triggered because the CPU of my EC2 instance is 2.5, which is less than 30. Now it has triggered that alarm. Watch what auto scaling group is doing. So it has triggered the alarm. Watch. I'll click refreshing here. Even before I refresh, one thing we can do is if you go to auto scaling groups, and I know we are almost at time, so give me like 5 minutes. We are almost done with this. So if you select your auto scaling group, right? No, I'm on target group, sorry. So I go to auto scaling group. You select your auto scaling group. Your auto scaling group has an activity. So you can see the activity here. You can see right now, the latest activity is it is terminating one EC2 instance. And first it would drain the application load balancer. So it won't be able to route traffic to that EC2 instance before it removes it. That's why it is taking time. But eventually when this, see right now is saying, waiting for the application load balancer to drain the connection, meaning that it's waiting for the application load balancer to remove that EC2 instance from the connection of the EC2 instance is going to be routing traffic to. Once that is done, the auto scaling group would remove this EC2 instance. So that draining part is what is taking long now. But eventually, because it has triggered the alarm that says remove one EC2 instance if the CPU utilization is less than 35. And we also have some scaling policy where we have the minimum we want is 1. So what it would do is it will remove one EC2 instance. So I know the draining part takes long because it would take some time to drain it from the thing before it removes it. But eventually it will remove one EC2 instance. Does anyone have any question? I know this was kind of like a lot. Was it a lot for today? Or today, remember the main thing we did is we registered for a domain name. We set up our SSL on port 443, and we create an auto scaling group to scale up our EC2 instance based on our desired capacity and the scaling policy we just created. So those are the 3 things we did today. Does anyone have any question while I'm waiting for this to drain? Are you guys still even here? Because it's very quiet. Okay.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yes, I am.
I'm here.
Right
Okay.
here.
All right, cool. All right, this brings us to the end of the project. This is project 2 done in the bag. Right now, the question you should be asking yourself is, how much do you know about this project 2? Do you understand every single thing we've done up to this point? Remember, you see, our site is working. This is something always getting in the way. You can see our site is working. It is fully encrypted. Now, if I can give you guys this site, you guys can type awsclass.com on your site. You'll be able to access this site. Just any site you guys are accessing online, it could be deployed this way. There's different method of deploying sites, but this is one of the methods. So let me see this thing. Why it always takes forever to drain that application load balancer, but this is what is delaying it, because here under the activity, it is still draining that EC2 instance. You can see it is waiting for the application load balancer to do that. So once it has finished draining it, meaning that application load balancer will remove one EC2 instance from the EC2 instance it wants to be routing traffic to. Once that is done, the auto-scaling group will come here and delete one of this. So when you guys test this when you are working on it, make sure you wait for it to drain it and remove it. I know it is taking time, but there you go. See, it has removed that one of those EC2 instance. And if I remove my filter, you can see my auto scaling group EC2 terminated. This is because of the scaling policy I just created. That's what I wanted to show you guys. So this is how you can dynamically scale up and down. So now let's say this site is just here. People will start to access it now. Now more people are coming. The CPU utilization on that one EC2 instance that is running will continue to rise. And when it rises past 80%, which is what we put for that scaling policy, the auto scaling group will create another one. So that is how you can dynamically scale up and down without wasting money. So that is the end of this class and the end of this project. Make sure you understand everything we did up to this point, because Friday, we are going to briefly recap this and we are going to start our next project. But on Friday, you are going to be creating a VPC with 6 subnets in 2 different availability zones, 3 in one availability zone, 3 in the other one. Your knowledge should be at the point where you feel comfortable creating a VPC by yourself. I'll still give you all the steps and all that stuff, but you should be getting closer to, if not there, but feeling comfortable that you can create a VPC by yourself. So that is it for this class and this project. I will send you guys the recording. Does anyone have any questions before we leave? Okay.
No questions.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys. And I will see you on Friday.
All right, man.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
No
Thanks.
problem.
Thank you.
No problem. Bye.